We're in the middle of a series right now, but I'm actually going to kind of stop to pray for us again, just 1 minute here. I don't know about you. I don't know the kind of week that you guys have had, but I just feel like I've been having like crazy week after crazy week after crazy week. Can anyone relate to that? Just having like, oh, when is the craziness going to stop? And it's just been nuts. But I'm going to trust that God is bigger than the craziness. I'm going to trust that He is better than the craziness. And tonight we're actually going to look at that He's actually over and even control over the craziness. So we don't have to get frantic. We don't have to be stressed. And we don't have to worry because we know that God is in control and He's loving and He loves you. Think about that. And we're going to talk about this again later. But just this one thought, if you don't hear anything else tonight, God is in control of everything. And He loves you. That means we can trust anything that comes our way. And not everything that God does necessarily maybe He causes to us. We live in a world where there is choice and where people make sinful choices, and there's a fallout of that. But the big picture of tonight is that God is in control and cannot be stopped, and He loves you, which means we can trust anything that comes our way will not have the last word in our lives. And so let's pray. Again, if this is your first night here and you're like, what's going on? This guy's talking and he's praying. This is just kind of weird. We believe that we don't pray to a ceiling or we just pray to lights or that we just close our eyes and pray to our own thoughts. But we believe there's a God who's active and who loves us. And He hears us and He actually moves when we pray. So would you join me in praying for tonight? Jesus, we came from a full school day. We came from sports. We came from practices. We come from tests. We come from being tested. We come from challenges. We come from friend drama. We come from house drama. We come from just sort of like coasting through life. Whatever brings us here, God, you know us and you see us and you love us. And so tonight I pray that as we go through this talk, that it wouldn't just be me talking, Lord, but really would be us hearing from you. That's ultimately what's going to last and make the lasting difference. It's not going to be a blup story. It's not going to be a whatever in our lives. It's going to change us. What's going to change us is the presence of the living God who made us for this very purpose, to know you and to love you and follow you. In Jesus' name, all God's people said, amen. John Piper is a preacher, and you may have heard of this before, but here's another freebie for you. God is most glorified when you are most satisfied in Him. A lot of times we wonder, like, what does worship and what does living for God look like, and what is like living this Christian life look like? God is actually most glorified in your life when you're most satisfied in Him, which means that the more joy you can find in life and living it out in a way that honors God, the more God is honored in worship. Like when you go to school and you use your brains and you're doing it in a way that's honoring God, God is glorified. And when you bring that back to Him and say, God, thanks for my brains. That's pretty awesome. I can write stuff down. That's pretty awesome. I can whatever. If you ever just stop and think what you're doing and say, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and you look up and say, God, you made me this way, that worships and glorifies God. But God doesn't want us to just sit in the mud. Jesus said, I came for you that you may have joy, and you'd have it to the full. And I hope that tonight is kind of a continuation of that. This whole series is about getting to know that God who came for us so that we'd have joy and have the real, full, lasting kind of joy that He's intended us for. Move this out of the way still. These things drive me nuts. All right. Can you see me now? I felt like I was blocking my view. It's just stuff. Hey. All right. I'm just babbling now from stuff. But we started a series called Impossible, and we're looking at some things that are actually impossible for God. God doesn't have any limits. He has no limitations, or so the way that we think of them, He has no limitations. He's all-powerful. He could do whatever He wants, which we're going to talk about tonight. But God actually there's a few things that are impossible for God to do because they go against His very nature and against His very power and His very ability. And that is that we talked about it's impossible for God to change. God is always going to be the same. The Bible tells us that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That means when you have a mountaintop experience or you go to camp in a couple weeks or you have a moment where God was really great in your life, in the midst of the darkness or the struggles or the doubts or when you change or your emotions are up or down or when you don't feel it, God hasn't changed based on your feelings. It's pretty awesome. Last week we looked at it's impossible for God to lie. God is always honest. God is always truth. And we may bend light. We may bend truth. We may bend reality. But the truest form of reality and the truest form of life and everything else comes from God. And He cannot lie, which means we could trust His promises. We could trust what He says about Himself. And we could trust who we are because of what He said about who. Does that make sense? All right, keep moving. Tonight, we're going to talk about failure. Failure is a part of life. We've all failed. We've all done a lot of different things in our lives to fail. And I don't know if you guys, how many of you guys have ever failed? Any of you guys ever failed at anything? Some of you guys ever failed? I fail all the time. Epic fails all the time. I'm gonna ask you guys a few questions to talk amongst yourselves in a moment. But isn't it like the worst time to fail is when you're trying to do good for something else? I was trying to do good and I failed. I was going to help somebody out and I got pulled over and I got a ticket. We had a friend who was helping us out. Actually, Tom, where's Tom Joyce? You in here tonight? I thought I saw you earlier, Tom. Here. Tom Joyce was over at our house. They were helping us with our water heater because it went out and we couldn't shower and our kids are getting stinky. I don't stink. My kids stink. And so we need, just kidding. That's terrible to say. I stink too. We all stink. You all stink if you think about it. We all do. We just cover it up with lots of perfumes. What am I even talking about? Anyways, we had a hot water heater and it went out. Tom goes over there to help us. And then on the way home, his wife gets hit by a car in another car. She's alive. And so are her kids. But of all things, I was going to help the locks. I was trying to do something good, and then something bad happened. And that's just the worst when failure or something else comes our way, or someone else fails around us in the midst of trying to do something good. Here is a fail compilation of people who are trying to do the ice bucket challenge. Have you guys? Yes. So how many of you guys have done the ice bucket challenge? I did it, and people claimed that my water wasn't cold enough. It's just because I let all the ice melt in there before I actually poured it on me, so there wasn't much ice coming over. But it was freezing. A lot of us have done the ice bucket challenge. It's to raise awareness for ALS. But here is a group of people. Seriously, the challenge is enough. It's cold water. You don't need to go crazy. But these people decided to do something above and beyond, and this is what they got.
Yeah. Oh my God!
Oh!
Oh my God!
Oh! These are terrible.
He volunteered to dump the water on me, and I'm sure he's going to enjoy it.
He enjoyed that.
Oh my God! That is horrible. That's it. Forget it.
The dog. Why? Oh.
3, 2,
That's a metal can in his face.
President Barack Obama.
We don't condone drinking, by the way, and this is why.
Oh, I did not mean
He had a pot thrown at his head. And this is why selfie sticks should be banned. Oh.
Oh.
Ow. And then she comes out of nowhere. Why?
Cue the music.
One thing he said, though, you didn't hear is...
Paul Curtis, Mikey and Brooklyn, and Dana Curtis-Selly.
the face. I wish I could have slow-mo. And it still goes! That's just it. He's knocked out!
Okay, it's alright. Let move me.
Cranky dad. Dad, no! Wait for it. Wait for it. Oh!
Last one.
Oh!
You okay?
Listen. Oh, man. That's all for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. The world is not short of failures. We've all failed, and failures can obviously be a big laugh when it's not us. But definition of failure, I kind of combined two of them together from Merriam-Webster, or whoever this Merriam person is, says failure is to not perform an expected task, to fall short, to not succeed, or to stop working as expected, like when your kidneys fail. Like they're supposed to do something, and you expect it, and then they stopped working. That is failure. But what are some different ways that people fail in life? Think of it. or this that we can't keep up with something, or that we fail a test. So turn to the person next to you, maybe in groups of 3 or so, and come up with a list of what are all the different ways that people can fail in life. Like categories, not like specifics, like I could fail a driver's exam. Like categories. All right, get this list real quick. Give you another 10 seconds. See how many you can come up in 10 seconds. We're going to get some categories right now. I've been talking with these guys up here, and they have the one and done. They said this is the only one they needed to come up with. This is the only category. They said we came up with one, and we're perfect, and we don't fail. This is not a failed list. This is a perfected list. All right, Alex, what's one way that we could fail in life?
Relationships.
Relationships. Bam. Been there. Still there, I think. I don't know. In a sense, I'm trying to be the best husband. I fail. I fail and I have no friends, but it's. All right, that's another way we could another way, yeah.
Cooking.
Cooking. Anyone fail at cooking? Anyone a terrible cook? That was really. I didn't think of that one. I have a whole list up there. I didn't think of cooking. How many of you guys have ever just made something and you give it to your parents or whatever, and it's just completely disgusting and they ate it anyway? Anyone? No one. Your parents just say, "I'm not touching that." All right, there's another one. Another thing?
You could fail a test.
All right, you fail a test. Okay, you got something you're supposed to do at school, and you fail a test. We fail tests. I've failed way too many tests in my life. I know it's not a surprise to anybody. All right, another one?
Clothing can fail.
Clothing can... Wardrobe malfunction. Sorry, you do not want this wardrobe to fail. I'm telling you what, it's not a pretty. This is the cover of the horror. I'm telling you. All right.
Bending mirrors.
Bending mirrors. I don't know when that would happen. Last week. That was good. Excellent. So you could fail at an illustration. Here, I could do it again. I got the mirror back here. It's right here. Should we do it? Did anyone get a shard of glass in their teeth afterwards? Anyone? Next one.
Diets.
Failed diets. Okay, so we start a commitment. I'll put that in the category of we can start a commitment, and then we fail the commitment. Hey, I'm going to do this for, anyone fail at a commitment before? A lot of us have failed there.
I'm a good artist.
Okay, good artist. But sometimes we could fail at art, too. We could fail at art. I know I failed a lot of my art stuff. Is that supposed to be a dog or a cat? No, it's supposed to be Mother Teresa. I don't Why? I don't even know how those two got connected. Next question for you guys. This is for you guys to discuss amongst yourselves again. Try to find some different people and come up with more than just one. You guys, I know it's perfect. I know they had more. I'm just giving them a hard time. Just getting under their skin. What are some of the hardest types of failure for people to deal with? So, when you got relationships again. Relationships. All right, so what are some of the hardest, so when people fail, there's certain failures are nothing. Okay, I failed riding a bike. Still can't ride a bike, whatever, no big deal. I can still get most of my life, but there's other failures that are really hard to bring up or talk about or hard to deal with. Come up with them, and we'll ask. Go ahead. Is that the hardest to deal with? Do you guys got one? All right, Corey's going to start us off. He says he's got one. Oh, he doesn't have one yet. Think about it. All right, we'll get Nemo here.
Wait, more things we fail at?
Yeah, what are the hardest failures to deal with? Hardest failures to deal with. All right, Corey's going to start us off. We're going to take a couple of these, and we'll get rolling. All right, Corey.
All right. When you fail your parents.
Oh, all right, failing people that you love or people that you care about. The worst thing to hear is, I'm not angry with you guys. I'm just really disappointed. Oh, I failed you. Oh, that's good. Okay.
A failure to be accepted.
All right, so failure to be accepted. So you tried to hang out with people and you just never got in the in crowd. Is that kind of what you're saying? That is a really hard one to deal with because it goes against ourselves.
Failure to fill standards or expectations that other people have for you.
All right, so not just your parents' expectations, but other people have expectations on you, and you let them down. This is an insightful bunch. I don't think we even need to talk anymore because you guys got this figured out.
Singing the national anthem.
All right, singing the national anthem, Christina Aguilera. Sorry. Christina, that's my Christina Aguilera impression. I can do lots of impressions. That's not one of them. That sounds like is that a gorilla, Mike? What are you doing? What are you doing? Think about it. Some failures are harder to deal with than others. And some of those go with the idea that things that make us feel like an outsider. We fail at something that everybody else can do. Why can't I do it? You guys ever felt that way? You don't have to raise your hands on this one, but just think about it. We know people that are dealing with this too. And so tonight, even if you don't struggle with any of the things that we're talking about, hopefully we're going to learn things about our God that we can invite other people to experience as a result. I mean, sometimes we fail at things that make us feel like an outsider. Everyone else can do that thing. Everyone else on the team can do that thing, but I sit on the bench because I can't. Things that make us feel inferior. Like I feel like less than a person. I remember like hiding because I was failing in chemistry, and I always did pretty well in science, and I was really struggling. I just did not connect with my chemistry teacher. Anyone have a bad chemistry teacher? Oh, Mrs. Reynolds was the worst. I'm sure you're nice in real life, but not in teacher land. And so it was terrible. That was my shaking the fist to the camera because it's out there. But no, I struggled with her, but I was failing, and I didn't want anybody to know. I was ashamed because I felt inferior, and I didn't bring it up to anybody else that I needed help. The ones that we care about the most and we let them down, we don't meet up their expectations, those things can be really, really terrible. Some of those things are really hard to deal with. Before I go into some other things, but a lot of times failure can cause us to hide. A failure can attack our identity. Failure can make us feel like less than a person. And sometimes failure can really just sort of put us in a spiral where we doubt everything. Have you guys ever failed at something and were afraid to try something new or try it again because you failed and you're afraid of the embarrassment and everything else that went with it? I was actually going to tell this story, but I'm telling it anyway because I'm going to tell it. I was camping. I was maybe 11 years old or so, maybe 12. I was just before, well, maybe 10, just before junior high. And we went camping with my family and our neighbors. We all threw everything in the back of their pickup truck, and we'd go to this campsite. And we had all our camping stuff set up. And this was like rugged camping where we had the camper in the tent and even like a little electric TV. This is hardcore camping. But we're out in the middle of the woods in the middle of nowhere. And so they did not have bathrooms. I know, in the middle of the area. So we had to go to the camping area unless you wanted to dig a hole to take care of your business. I'm not that kind of camper. Is anyone that kind of camper? I know a few of you guys are like, yeah, dig a hole. That's what you do. You cover it up. It's what the bears do. I'm a bear. No, I'm not a bear. I'm a wimp. That's what I do. I can't do these things. And so, like, you know, you get your parents when you're little are like, hey, Mike, you should go to the bathroom before we go on this trip and all that kind of stuff. I'm fine. I don't have to go. You're fine. I don't have to go. And all of a sudden I had bratwurst. Bratwurst. Just say one word. It's terrible. Bratwurst. And like, it was like something was not fully cooked in that bratwurst. And so about like 40 minutes or so into me eating this bratwurst, I just felt this. You okay, Mike? Yeah, I'm fine. You okay, Mike? I'm fine. And then there's like the gas that you try to hide, but it ekes out. Oh, it was not me. So I'm like, Mike, do you have to go to the bathroom? I'm like, yes. Well, so finally I'm like, I gotta go to the bathroom. So my dad gives me instructions, but I was never really good at listening to instructions. I failed at listening to instructions. There's so many layers of failure on this. I didn't go to the bathroom when I didn't follow instructions then. I didn't follow instructions. My dad told me where to go for the thing. And so I'm walking. And so it starts off with kind of like a nice walk. You're walking purposely because you know it's coming, but you also don't want to walk like you're in crisis danger mode. And that's how the walk starts. But then as soon as you start to realize that it's further than you wanted, like the sweat starts beating down your forehead, you're like, it's not coming. I'm not going to make it. And as soon as that thought gets in your brain, it's like, I don't know, it's like your brain talks to your bowels and it says, just give up. And all of a sudden it's like that much harder. So then you have to start walking and clinching. Anyone ever walked and clinched? It's the worst thing. But then it's like, but then, I don't know why, but somehow we think if we stand on our tippy toes, it's going to help. So it goes from this to this. So I'm like practically on heels. So the bathroom is in sight. And I don't know, this is another weird thing about my weird brain and psychosis, but I don't think I'm alone on this. Have you guys ever noticed, like if you got a long road trip and you're like, I gotta go. And you're gonna make it. You probably could have gone another 15 minutes, but as soon as you know the bathroom's coming, it's like, you're hopping. And it's like, you just feel like you're barely gonna get there. And it's like, why are we talking about this? I'm sorry. But anyways, so I get there, the bathroom is in sight. Well, my body just said, yay, whoa. And so now I was doing the walk of the shame walk. Keep it straight, keep it on one pant leg, keep them. So I got in the bathroom. And I was like, I'm gonna get there. And I'm starting to I could barely even, I don't even care who's in here at this point in time. I'm like, my pants are coming off in the middle of the bathroom. I'm getting to that stall as quick as I can. And sure enough, terrible as it may sound, it's on the floor. I in fear, I hear a group of people coming. I jump into the stall, and I slam the door. I'm like, finally, I'm safe. and in comes a group of junior high girls. I was in the girls' bathroom. They start talking about what they see on the floor. I'm in there, like, red as can be. And, like, at that point in time, like, normally if you're in the bathroom and you kind of want a little privacy, you just give that polite cough. No, nothing. I'm holding my breath. I'm like, they must not know I'm in here. They're like, oh, I don't know. And then they look down there and they're talking about me as if I can't hear them. It looks like boy shoes. It's not me. Anyway, so they waited outside when I walked out. They finally left. My parents are now looking for me because it's been a good 20 minutes. Like, he just said he had to go to the bathroom. He is lost in the woods, eaten by a bear. I don't know what's going on. And finally I came out there, and there's like, God, it was awful. But failing made me want to run, and it made me want to hide. Failing made me feel embarrassed. It made me feel ashamed, and it made me feel like I never wanted to talk about that again until I was in front of a room of 80 people. That's not. But when we fail, something happens in us where we feel kind of bad. But the other thing happens too is when people fail us, not only do we feel like maybe we want to hide, but sometimes we feel angry, we feel disappointed, and we feel hurt. But failure is kind of a part of life. And when it comes to us, we know we fail. We aren't strong enough, we aren't smart enough, we don't have enough insight to know how to never make a mistake. But where is God in the midst of our failures? I don't know about you, but sometimes I've made mistakes, and I've wondered, like, God, where are you? Like, even though it was my mistake, like, if I'm honest, like, I was kind of what caused this to myself. Like, why didn't you warn me or something? Like, why didn't you, like, write a book of instructions that could, like, help? Oh, shoot. But why, what, so anyways, blame God sometimes, and sometimes when failure happens to us, or people let us down, we're like, God, why did you let this happen? Why did you let this happen in our lives? And a lot of times we want to say it's God's fault. And I think when it comes to God, when it comes to life, a lot of us view God from our human standpoint, making mistakes and failure and righting and wronging things or goofing things up. But there's a different perspective that we need to be for Christ followers. And there's a different biblical view of this that we need to hold on to. And if we hold on to it the right way, it doesn't make our failures go away. And it doesn't make other people's failures on our lives or the hardships in our lives any harder to deal with, any easier to deal with necessarily. But what it does is it gives us a hope that gets us through it. But to kind of start us off, I think a lot of us are in situations where we feel like maybe God failed us. Something happens in our life where we fail and stuff, and we're like, where are you in the midst of this? And so I asked a couple people to share a little bit of their perspective of a couple things that happened to them recently and not so recently that sort of shook their faith. And so Emma, if you're here, and then Michaela, if you want to come up. So give it up for Michaela and Emma. We were talking in the student leadership team on Wednesdays. If you guys are ever looking for something to do on Wednesday nights, we get together, we have a meal every time, we hang out, we talk about the Bible, and we talk about, like, what does it mean to be a leader for our generation? And so it's pretty a great time. But anyways, they're both there, and we're talking about it. And so we'll put Emma up first, and then we'll put Michaela, because I know where your stories are at. And so, but then I kind of asked the group, I said, like, hey, like, where are some places where we feel like God may have failed us? And they both said they'd be willing to share a little bit of this. And so it takes a lot of courage to talk in a microphone, so give them your respect.
A big place that God failed me was when he took away my grandpa. He was my best friend and the person I always went to. And I always blamed God. I was like, God, why would you take away someone that I love so much, the only person I could talk to about everything and stuff? So that's where I feel like God failed me at.
Loss of loved ones can be really hard, and Michaela's gonna share a little bit about that too. But like we know our bodies fail, right? We know like our lives fail. We know that we don't live forever. But in the midst of that, like when we lose people that are loved, that we love, like it's like, God, why that person? Of all the things and all the people in the world, why them and why now? To kind of share more of that with Michaela.
So, like, this has been going on for, like, the last, 7 years, kind of. So my grandma got Alzheimer's when she was, pretty young. She's in her 50s. And I didn't really get it at first. And it's always been just kind of, not necessarily not a big deal. But I live far away from them, for one. They live really far, so I never really saw them a lot. My grandma was always so loving and caring that I had the bond with her, even though she was far. But, recently, this past year, I had just I had a lot of anger built up inside me, and I didn't know why. And it was just this constant, like, I would take it out on people in my family just all the time, and I would be mad just for no reason. I couldn't figure out why. And one time I was just sitting in the car one day, and I started bawling my eyes out, and I was like, I want my grandma. I'm like, God, why did you take my grandma away from her? I don't see her a lot, for one. And I missed her, and I finally found the root of the problem, and then I started talking to more people about it just in my family and realizing that they were going through the same thing as me. And finally I understood that God is in control, whether or not I understand it. And this is still going on, and I still just like, I don't get it, God, but you know what? I'm going to trust that you're doing the right thing, and for some reason, this is part of your plan for me. So, yeah.
Those are awesome. When real life hits us, when pain hits us, when hardships hits us, it's kind of hard to say, like, God, can you fail? Did you fail me? Like, you're supposed to be all loving, right? You're supposed to be there for me. And yet this stuff is happening. And so either you don't love me, or you're not in control, or maybe both. Maybe you failed. And sometimes it's easy for us to look at this, and sometimes the hardships in our lives say, in some ways it's easier for me to think that you failed, God, than to think that you might cause this for me on purpose. How does that work for my lives? Life is going to have difficulty in it. We talked about this last year. We've talked about this every year a little bit. And so difficulty is going to come your way. How you hold on to that and how you relate to God in those times is so crucial for our faith. And so some of you may not be in a struggle right now, and that is so awesome. And so I want to encourage you tonight, as we talk about some of these aspects of what God is like, to remember them. One of the things that we need to do as believers is to remember in the darkness what we knew to be true in the light. To remember in the darkness what we knew to be true in the light. Sometimes we come in dark times, we need to remind ourselves of the truth that we knew when things were good. So take these things and let them sit with you and rest with you. And if you're in a hardship right now, I don't want to pretend like this is going to make anything better, but hopefully this will give you like a little bit of a tool or a handlebar to sort of relate and engage with God. The one thing that we never want to do is shut God down in the process. I'm going through a hard time, you failed me. This is too much. And we shut down and we deal with it when all the time God is inviting us to open up with him. He's big enough to handle where we're at. So this is a couple of things to think about, is that we need to know it's impossible for God to fail. So it's impossible for God to change. It's impossible for God to lie. And it's impossible for God to fail. God is sovereign, which means he could do whatever he wants and he doesn't have to ask anyone's opinion for it. He is sovereign, which means he could do whatever he wants and no one can stop him from doing it. But there's a few different worldviews that kind of relate to problems and failure that I want us to understand before we get to that. The first one is atheism. And what does atheism have to say about our failures and about our pain? Really, atheism is atheistic, which means no God. There's no God, and therefore there's no purpose, and failure and pain have no meaning. Unless it's there to maybe make you better or to make the species better or stronger that we can adapt to. There's really no purpose to our failure and our pain and our emotions and our struggles. You just got to deal with them because somehow we're emotionally wired, and that's just how we've been chemically created by chance. But there's no God, and there's no purpose, and there's no means for it. The second thing is deism. How many of you guys have heard the phrase deism before? Some of you guys have heard that before? I wanted to get a spinning top to put on a table here, but deism is kind of like the idea that God sort of like spins a top and poof, and the world starts spinning, and then while the world's spinning, he just sort of says, I gave it everything it needs to go, and then he removes himself, and he goes and plays ping pong, or that paddleboard. I don't know. Just wanted to click on the microphone. But he does something else while the world continues to spin and wobble, and it falls back and forth, and maybe it falls apart. God's like, well, I put it in motion, but I'm hands off. I created it, and I put it on the road, and now it's done. That's deism. And with deism, there's really no hope. It says, okay, there's maybe meaning to life because God created the world, but there's really no hope for our pain or our struggles or our problems or our failures. They're just there because God doesn't care. He's off in the distance. The last thing that we believe as Christians, we believe as believers, that we believe God is intimately involved with creation. That God made us and that God is involved and he knows what's happening with us. He knows how you're feeling. He knows what's going on. And there's a couple of Bible verses I just wanted to share with us I think are really important. First, it says this in Psalm 174:4. It says he determines the number of stars and he calls them each by name. God is personal with his creation. God doesn't just make creation and walk away, but it says in Psalm 174:4 that he determined, he planned it. It wasn't accidental. It was an intentional thought that brought creation into being. And it goes on to even say the things that seem insignificant to us, stars far away, that are not insignificant to God, that he calls them each by name. That God would actually have an intimate working knowledge of all the parts of creation in the universe, which is pretty big. We're going to see that in just a second here. The second verse is this. He says this in Isaiah. He's trying to encourage the people who are forgetting and losing hope in God. I think we've all been there. We forget God's there with us sometimes. We forget that God cares sometimes. And then, so he's telling this group of people who have been basically blown it with God. They've screwed up, they've doubted, and now they're in this rough spot. And so he's telling them, lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Like basically look up. You guys can look up right now if you want. Imagine stars above you. Who created all these things? He who brings out the starry host, meaning like all the stars in the universe, one by one, and calls them each forth by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing. So God tells us in Isaiah, says, all this world has been created. I know it by name. I'm intimately involved. And because of my power and my strength, not any of them goes missing. That God is actually keeping it going. Like it's not just a top that he spins and walks off, but God is actually involved in the things in the universe. But not just the big things in the universe. He's involved with you and me, and it says this in Acts. Next verse, I think, is right. For in him we live and move and have our being, that God is what gives us all life. Now, these are things that we know. We've heard these things before. But I just want us to understand, where does it come from in the Bible? Sometimes you say, hey, what do you believe about God? Well, I believe he's he's a part of creation. He's involved with us. Where do you get that from? If it doesn't come from the Bible, then you're not getting it from a trustworthy source. And in the Bible, it's really clear as day, is that not only is the universe sustained by God, but he also is sustaining us, that all of us come from God. And it's from God that we live and move have our being. If it weren't for him, we'd have nothing. Whether we know it or not, or whether we know him or not, right now we have life because he's given it to us. Every breath is a gift. None of us earned or worked for our first breath. It was given to us, and it was sustained from God. And even more than that, I love this verse because this isn't just happening by a force. We talked about that in Star Wars, like this, The Force Awakens. It's not like these weird midichlorian things that are out there and we're trying to figure out how to control things, and it's just this impersonal sort of force that's out there. But God is personal, because all of this that's being held together, you and the universe, isn't just held together by some kind of unknown God, but it's held by a loving, personal God, and his name is Jesus, because it says this in Colossians 1:17. It says, and you get these verses later on tonight too, it says, Jesus is before all things. That means he's always existed. And in Jesus, all things hold together. That means Jesus is holding everything together right now. And that word holds things together literally in Greek means that he's carrying it. It's not that he's just holding it together in his hand or whatever, but that Jesus is carrying creation right now. Creation is cared for by a loving God. So our lives and our world and our circumstances, as broken as they may seem right now, matter, and they're cared for by a loving God. To give you some perspective of this Jesus that we worship, that we sing songs about, and that kind of stuff, is that God is involved in the infinitely small. I mean, think about the universe, right? You have us. Here's the world, right? And everything in it. And then inside that world, you can go almost infinitely small to the tiniest little particles that we can't even see. And the closer you get to those particles, the more they spread out. And then there's all this space in between that you can't even figure out. And then God is also infinitely big, where there's huge universes that he sees. And God knows all of that. And science did this great thing back in the 70s. You've got to love the clothing that they're wearing in 1977, my birth year. They made this video, and I want us to watch it. It's a little bit long, but I just want you to just kind of picture for a minute. When we say that Jesus holds everything together, that Jesus is in control of everything, this is what he sees and knows about and keeps active all the time. Kevin. Isn't that some great graphics right there? High tech. It's called The Power of 10.
The picnic near the lakeside in Chicago is the start of a lazy afternoon, early 1 October. We begin with a scene 1 meter wide, which we view from just 1 meter away. Now, every 10 seconds, we will look from 10 times farther away, and our field of view will be 10 times wider. This square is 10 meters wide, and in 10 seconds, the next square will be 10 times as wide. Our picture will center on the picnickers, even after they've been lost to sight. 100 meters wide. The distance a man can run in 10 seconds. Cars crowd the highway. Powerboats lie at their docks. The colorful bleachers are Soldiers Field. This square is 1 kilometer wide, 1,000 meters. The distance a racing car can travel in 10 seconds. We see the great city on the lake shore. 10 to the 4th meters, 10 kilometers. The distance a supersonic airplane can travel in 10 seconds. We see first the rounded end of Lake Michigan, then the whole Great Lake. 10 to the 5th meters. The distance an orbiting satellite covers in 10 seconds. Long parades of clouds, the day's weather in the Middle West. 10 to the 6th, a 1 with 6 zeros, 1 million meters. Soon the Earth will show as a solid sphere. We are able to see the whole Earth now, just over a minute along the journey. The Earth diminishes into the distance, but those background stars are so much farther away that they do not yet appear to move. A line extends at the true speed of light. In 1 second, it half crosses the tilted orbit of the moon. Now we mark a small part of the path in which the Earth moves about the sun. Now the orbital paths of the neighbor planets, Venus and Mars, then Mercury. Entering our field of view is the glowing center of our solar system, the sun, followed by the massive outer planets, swinging wide in their big orbits. That odd orbit belongs to Pluto. A fringe of a myriad comets too faint to see completes the solar system. Ten to the 14th. As the solar system shrinks to one bright point in the distance, our sun is plainly now only one among the stars. Looking back from here, we note 4 southern constellations, still much as they appear from the far side of the Earth. This square is 10 to the 16th meters, 1 light year, not yet out to the next star. Our last 10-second step took us 10 light years further. The next will be 100. Our perspective changes so much in each step now that even the background stars will appear to converge. At last, we pass the bright star Arcturus and some stars of the Dipper. Normal but quite unfamiliar stars and clouds of gas surround us as we traverse the Milky Way galaxy. Giant steps carry us into the outskirts of the galaxy. And as we pull away, we begin to see the great flat spiral facing us. The time and path we chose to leave Chicago has brought us out of the galaxy along a course nearly perpendicular to its disk. The 2 little satellite galaxies of our own are the Clouds of Magellan, 10 to the 22nd power, 1 million light years. Groups of galaxies bring a new level of structure to the scene. Glowing points are no longer single stars, but whole galaxies of stars seen as one. We pass the big Virgo cluster of galaxies among many others, 100 million light years out. As we approach the limit of our vision, we pause to start back home. This lonely scene, the galaxies like dust, is what most of space looks like. This emptiness is normal. The richness of our own neighborhood is the exception. The trip back to the picnic on the lakefront will be a sped-up version, reducing the distance to the Earth's surface by 1 power of 10 every 2 seconds. In each 2 seconds, we will appear to cover 90% of the remaining distance back to Earth. Notice the alternation between great activity and relative inactivity. a rhythm that will continue all the way into our next goal, a proton in the nucleus of a carbon atom beneath the skin on the hand of the sleeping man at the picnic. Ten to the 9th meters, 10 to the 8th, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are back at our starting point. We slow up at 1 meter, 10 to the 0 power. Now we reduce the distance to our final destination by 90% every 10 seconds, each step much smaller than the one before. At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin, crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA. As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, a molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At the atomic scale, the interplay of form and motion becomes more visible. We focus on one commonplace group of 3 hydrogen atoms bonded by electrical forces to a carbon atom. 4 electrons make up the outer shell of the carbon itself. They appear in quantum motion as a swarm of shimmering points. At 10 to the minus 10 meters, 1 angstrom, we find ourselves right among those outer electrons. Now we come upon the 2 inner electrons held in a tighter swarm. As we draw toward the atom's attracting center, we enter upon a vast inner space. At last, the carbon nucleus, so massive and so small. This carbon nucleus is made up of 6 protons and 6 neutrons. We are in the domain of universal modules. There are protons and neutrons in every nucleus, electrons in every atom, atoms bonded into every molecule out to the farthest galaxy. As a single proton fills our scene, we reach the edge of present understanding. Are these some quarks in intense interaction? Our journey has taken us through 40 powers of 10. If now the field is 1 unit, then when we saw many clusters of galaxies together, it was 10 to the 40th, or 1 and 40 zeros.
Welcome to science class, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure if that's like an actual applause or if that's you're just thankful that it's over. Think about that. We're here, right? God knows the infinitely small, where there's space that we don't even understand, and the tiny things. Look at your hand, right? You can't even see the cells. Can you try to zoom in as far as we did? That's only 10 to the 15th power. That's 10 times 10, 15 times backwards. And they only went 10 times 10, 24 times, and they're on the outside of the universe. This world is huge, it's big, and it's so infinitely small. And the Bible tells, if you want to put that verse back up again, Colossians 1:17, is that Jesus is before all things, and in all things, Jesus holds them together. Right now, your very existence is being carried and sustained by not just an impersonal God, but a God who loves you, who knows the infinitely big, and paid an infinitely high price for your life, which is pretty remarkable. But when you think about how much that Jesus is holding together, it's no wonder that we could say that God is sovereign, that God cannot fail. Our failures and our world and everything else is from this vantage point. But think about how big and how infinitely huge God is and everything that God knows. These failures are small in comparison to the grand story of who God is. And so we believe God is not distant, that God loves us, and that God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful, and that he's sovereign, which means that God could do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Doesn't have to ask for anyone's opinion, and no one can stop him. That's the God that we serve. That's the God that we worship. That's the God we pray to, and that's the God we ask to do great things for us while we sit on this little blue planet spinning around this vast universe. And we believe that God sees it and he knows it, and God can do all things. He asks this rhetorical question in Jeremiah when some tough things were going on. He says, I am the Lord, next verse there, Kevin, I am the Lord, the God of all mankind. I am your God, not just a God, but I'm the God of you. And is there anything that's too hard for me? Luke 1:37, when Gabriel was talking to Mary about her having to conceive Jesus, he says this, he says, with God nothing shall be impossible. And it literally says that no word from God will ever fail. With God, anything that he says, nothing can stop. It says this in Isaiah 55:11. I know we're going through some of these kind of quick. I want to get you to your C group so you can talk about this a little bit. But he's talking about his word now, which basically is command. Anything that God wants to do, his will, he says this. He says, so is my will or my word or the things that I want to do or my decree that comes from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will always accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. Nothing can stop God from what he puts in motion. And that means that nothing can stop God from what he put in motion for your life, no matter how big the failures or how big the struggles that may seem, nothing can stop it. In fact, our human minds can't even begin to think of enough things for God to do because God's mind and his power is actually limitless. And it says this in Ephesians 3:20. I love this verse. It says, now all glory goes to God, the one we're talking about right now, who is able. He can actually do it through his mighty power at work within us to accomplish infinitely more than we can even ask or think. The word infinitely more, Paul actually makes up a word because he doesn't even know how to describe how big and how vast God is. So he says immeasurably, unbelievably, unconceivably more. He just says it can accomplish infinitely more than we can ask or think. We can't even imagine all the things that God can do because God is limitless. That's the God that we serve. God is sovereign. God cannot fail. And so what do we do with difficult times? How do we come to that God who's that huge and that small and that in the midst of it all when we really feel like, man, things have failed, things are hurting. I need something tangible here, Mike. I need something to hold on to here. That's a nice idea, but things are crumbling around me or things are crumbling around my friend or tragedy just happened recently, just this past weekend. Terrible things have happened, really sad stuff, loss of life, and people are like, where is God in the midst of this? And we have to understand that the first thing we need to do, and this is just an invitation for you, this first thing is just to trust. If this is true, if God really is in control, the first step for you is just to say to God, okay, I'm trying to trust. I'm trying to trust right now. I don't get it. I'm angry. I'm upset, but I'm going to just try to trust that you are who you say you are and that you are the author of this whole thing, that you have the authority. Here's a word for you. How many of you guys have read a good book, right? Any of you guys read a good book? Any of you guys don't like reading at all? All right, I'm not a big reader either, so this isn't going to make much sense for me either. But every book has a what? Oh, starts with an A. I realize that. Pages, words. Okay, that author. What is that author? Someone on this side. Someone on this side. What does the author do when they make a story? They write. Okay, so they tell the story. They write the story. Maybe the author can kind of tell and maybe get some input on what a good story would be. But ultimately, if you hold the pen, you get to write the story. If you hold the pen, you get to say how that story goes. If you hold the pen, you get to say what happens to those characters. Thank you. See, I don't read. That's helpful for you guys. All you readers out there, you guys are a smart crew. But if you hold the pen, you get to determine the destiny of every character. If you hold the pen, you get to write how things play out. And in the end, you get to write the ending. Now, other people may say, hey, the ending should go this way, or the ending should go that way. They may critique you. But if you hold the pen, ultimately, you get to write the story. A lot of times we talk about God as the author or the creator of all things, that he is the author, he has written all things, right? And so if God is holding the pen for creation, if God is holding the pen for our stories, that in the very end of the day, only God gets to write how that story is ending. And the good news is that God tells us in the word that story, if we've trusted in Jesus, it means that he will wipe away every tear from our eye. And that one day there will be a new heaven and a new earth. All creation will be restored, and that we'll have a relationship with him that lasts forever. In the midst of our small space on eternity. So you have a beginning. Right? Every story has a beginning, right? Can I spell, right? It has a middle. And it has an end, right? In the Bible, there's a beginning and a middle and an end. And somewhere we may be like right here in the story. God created the heavens and the earth. God redeems us through the cross. God makes a new heaven and an earth, and the story ends. But the crazy thing is that there's a continuation of the story because God's story never ends. But for us, while we're here, we may feel like some things have thrown off the story of God. While we're sitting here, we may feel like struggles and trials and temptations or things have come our way and we've failed. And we may feel like that has thrown off the great story of God. But because he's the author, it doesn't throw him off the big thing, the big ending. Some ways I like to look at it this way. Like my kids make mistakes. And sometimes I give them some choices in the house. And I'll say, Thomas, you could do all these things. And this is all the area of your world that you can control and do stuff. And but in that, he may make a mistake, but if he makes a mistake, it doesn't stop me from being his dad. If he makes a mistake, it doesn't stop me from ultimately being in control of his life right now while he's under my roof. If he makes a mistake and breaks something, it's already something in the realm of something that I was willing to let get broken by my son because he had access to it. Nothing was outside of my view as a dad. While things may have fallen apart in his world, while he may get reprimanded, while things may change for him, it didn't stop my role as a dad in his life. Does that make sense? And so while you have troubles and hardships and things come your way, things may stumble and things may fall. Sometimes we think God failed us, but it's never outside the realm of what God can do. And that is why the author of the Bible could write so confidently that God is able to take anything that we go through, and he can cause all things to work for the good of those who love him. That doesn't mean that that thing happened for a reason. Sometimes we say it's like fate. We sometimes approach God like fate. It's just like, well, everything's fate. It's written out. But what it does mean is that God, if you take anything in your life and you hand it to the author, it doesn't throw him off of where that story is going. And if you put your trust in Jesus, even if this world collapses, even if you lose your life, it doesn't change your eternity with him forever. Does that make sense? We going somewhere with that? Okay. And so what I want to encourage you guys is when you read the Bible, when you trust and when you go through stuff, is you have to understand that God has authority in your life. He is the author. He has written it. And if you trust him as the author, then you need to trust what the author says for your life. And you can trust him and you can obey. And even in the midst of hard times, you can hold on to him because ultimately he has the authority to say what he wants to and nothing can stop it because God cannot fail. That is God's sovereignty. Does that make sense? Are we tracking so far? And the second thing I want to encourage you guys is this, and we're going to get you guys to your C groups, I promise, is that if we know that God can't fail, then it totally reframes how you see your failures. Now, I don't know if it's going to reframe how my failure of pooping in the stall. I don't know how that's going to reframe my failure other than just to say, like, I'm just going to get through it. But you can know because it doesn't throw off God's big story that your life doesn't have to be thrown off track when you fail. Your life doesn't have to be thrown off track when you make a risk and you fall down or you feel embarrassed or you feel ashamed. It doesn't have to have the last word on your life. Nothing gets the last word on your life except the author and what he's penned for your life. And so you can take risks. You can make big mistakes. One of the things I notice when I talk with students like every week for coffee and stuff is that sometimes there's just this fear of like, I know I'm supposed to do great things with my life. I'm supposed to dream. I'm supposed to have stuff, but I don't have dreams. And I'm afraid of making a mistake. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid of failing. And we live under this constant stress of, am I going to fail school? Am I going to fail my friends? Am I going to fail other people? Yes, the answer is you will. And that's good news because God doesn't fail. And so he's not going to let your life fall apart if you just give it back to him. So we don't have to live under the tyranny of failure. We don't have to live under the tyranny of stress. We don't have to live under the tyranny of worry because we're afraid of what's going to happen because we know there's an author who's already written the story and that story ends with a great ending. And that's not going to change based on this moment. So we can hold on to him and live for him. And so I just want to encourage you guys, if you don't know the author, or maybe you kind of know about the author, would you just start with just by saying, God, I trust you. And if you do know the author, my challenge is for you is this. Do you talk about him? Do you talk about Jesus? Sometimes we risk failing talking about Jesus to other people because we're afraid of not having the right answers. We're afraid of failing. But the good news is you can't throw God's redemptive story off. You can't get rid of the cross by screwing up talking about it. So why don't you just start, take a risk, and let other people know how amazing our God is and that they can know an unfailing, unchanging, trustworthy God like we do. So let me pray. Jesus, thank you. I love you. We love you. And we thank you that you do not fail and cannot fail. God, I pray that you'd help us to take risks and that from those risks that you would help us to grow and learn and know that those failures don't have the last word in our lives and that when failures come and we doubt you, would you just help us to trust? If we're angry, if we're hurt, if we don't understand, would you help us to trust? I know that doesn't get rid of the pain and sometimes it doesn't make it feel any less personal and sometimes you feel no less distant, but I pray for those students that maybe are still working through that, God, that you just help them to recognize your presence right now and to hold on the hope of eternity to help them through the hope of the moment. In Jesus' name, How God's people said, amen. Wayne Gretzky said this: you will miss 100% of the shots you never take. 100% of the shots you never take. He was a hockey player, if you don't know who Wayne Gretzky is. You will miss all the shots you never try to take. Take a risk. Take a chance on failure and know that you can always get up because there's a God who doesn't fail that we hold on to. Guys, have a great week. I love you guys. Thank you for sitting through this and my crazy stories. Enjoy some time in your C groups, and we'll see you next week for our last one of the series. Oh, don't forget Super Bowl party Sunday. It's going to be awesome.